So that is where I've just spent the night, at the Orwell Hotel here in Felixstowe, home of hauntology and the start of today's adventure. And this is the main drag in Felixstowe here, 72 miles from London on the Suffolk coast. We'll just get down to the seafront down here and I'll explain what it's all about today. It's going to be amazing. Wow, this is the way to the seafront, which is fantastic. Wow, a beautiful dose of the North Sea, the gorgeous North Sea, the sea that I've come to love. I'd say the presence of the sea is kind of incidental though, it's a bit of a bonus. The clue to today's walk was in the name of the hotel there, the Orwell Hotel, not named after George, but the other way around. George Orwell, Eric Arthur Blair took his name from the river here, the River Orwell, which makes its confluence with the sea just up here, not far along, near the shipping container port, the UK's largest container port. Now you might think I'm not such a nerdy guy for shipping that I would come to visit that, but it does play a part of the story here today. My original plan was to come here was because it was where the theorist, the writer, the theorist, hugely influential guy called Mark Fisher lived and sadly passed away in Felixstowe. And I thought that was really curious. This guy who popularised the term hauntology that you'll have heard me mention from time to time, and I thought if I want to understand hauntology really in a way I have to come here to Felixstowe to kind of get a sense of the place that was possibly informing Fisher's ideas when he was writing about hauntology and the landscape. The walk that he did that I wanted to repeat was to go that way up the coast to cross the River Deben, which you'd have seen in other videos, that runs down through Woodbridge here to the sea, and then walk up the coast and then inland to Sutton Hoo. I was scuppered by the fact that the ferry you need to get across the River Deben doesn't run in the winter. So I had to either completely scrap the idea or choose another walk, and I've chosen another walk. You might say possibly a better walk. The ghostwriter M.R. James set one of his better known stories, Whistle and I'll Come to You, here in Felixstowe. He gave it a different name in the book, but it was based on Felixstowe here. There was a very memorable BBC adaptation of that, I think in the late 60s or early 70s, starring Michael Hordern. And Fisher wrote about that BBC adaptation. So seeing as we can't walk north along the North Sea coast and inland to the ship burial site at Sutton Hoo, what we're going to do instead is we're going to walk along the River Orwell from its confluence with the sea down here at Felixstowe up to the fine city of Ipswich. Is Ipswich a city or is it a town actually? That's a good question. And I thought it would be good to spend the night here. I mean, it's December, so it's, you know, it's not usually a time people associate with coming away to the English coast, but I thought I'd love to wake up somewhere different and get an early start and head up the River Orwell, because I was encouraged to do this walk because I thought it was about 11 miles, but actually I think it's slightly longer, and the sunset is at 3:45. Now I know some of you would be thinking, well, it's daylight, you haven't got off to that earliest. I mean, early start for me, it's 9 o'clock, 9 a.m, we're slightly after 9 by now, but you know, I take a while to get going in the morning, and had an amazing fry up at the Orwell Hotel, which is an amazing place. That room at the Orwell Hotel was 47 quid. I opened the door and my first reaction was to say, oh my word, look, I've got a suite. It's a beautiful old grand hotel. I recommend just go and stay there just for the hotel. This is a rather beautiful Victorian beach shelter that was built when they were trying to promote, first promote Felixstowe as a resort, as a seaside resort. A cause that was helped enormously by a very famous visitor who stayed in the house behind it. Let's go for a look. So this mansion up here was built in 1865 for a gun cartridge manufacturer. But in 1891 it's where Augusta, Empress of Germany, stayed with her family, which put Felixstowe on the map as a place to come and look at the sea. And down there we have the Spa Pavilion, but it looks like that was built, I think, in 1909. It's the other direction we need to head, though, towards those great cranes looming over the container port. That is really the official start of our walk. You can see why I thought it was a good idea to spend the night here, to get started in the morning. It's 2 hours since I woke up and I'm only just getting going. Hauntology. I mentioned hauntology, and I know a lot of you, probably most of you, might be thinking, well, what does that mean? If you haven't seen me talk about it in a previous video, I started banging on about it really during lockdown, when we were all indoors, and that's when I started to watch some of Fisher's videos, Mark Fisher's videos on YouTube. There's loads of lectures that he gave here on YouTube, and my eldest son, Oliver, was reading his work at the time as well, so we were having a lot of discussions about it in those long days at home. And my Fisher's idea of hauntology, I think it originates in a book by Derrida, Jacques Derrida, French philosopher. But really, Fisher's idea is where it started to get applied to culture, not to society or politics so much, but to ideas, the way we think and how we engage with culture. And Fisher's idea was really about this sort of nostalgia for lost futures, this nostalgia for a future that never came. And particularly us of a certain generation grew up with this almost quite sort of optimistic ideas of what the future would look like, of what 2024, 2025 would look like. And then we stopped dreaming about the future for some reason. Maybe because we were living in it, I don't know. And it seems to have gone, and somehow we're haunted by these lost futures. There's a nostalgia for them, but they're also present around us. They haunt us, they follow us around. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Fisher also talked about the weird and the eerie, but we'll talk about that down here. Now, I read somewhere that Felixstowe was the first place to have permanent beach huts. If you remember, you must have seen images of the beach huts being moved down to the sea and into the water, so people could go directly from their bathing hut into the water. But Felixstowe, yeah, is the first place they left them here. So it's the home of the beach hut, more than is, I guess, the home of hauntology. Maybe we're haunted by the lost future of the beach hut. One of the odd things is, in some ways, Felixstowe isn't the actual name. The name is said to derive from Felicia's Stowe, Anglo-Saxon name, Felicia's place, probably a farmstead of some description. They tried to say it was to do with Felix of Burgundy, but the name already existed before he did. But actually it was recorded as Walton, W-A-L-T-O-N, Walton, for many, many years. And when I opened up the BBC weather app today to check the weather forecast, it comes up as Walton, not Felixstowe, which is interesting. This pier here opened in 1905, and at the time was the third longest pier in the country. What's wonderful is the image of steamers, paddle steamers travelling between London and Great Yarmouth would stop at the end of the pier and visitors would disembark there. And you can't walk along the Suffolk coast without mentioning W.G. Sebald's hugely influential book, The Rings of Saturn. I should pronounce it Sebald now that I've heard that that's how it's pronounced. Which is a walk along, well, not just the Suffolk coast, but the Suffolk coast and the Suffolk countryside. A hugely influential book, very massively associated with even the sort of practice of walking and writing about walking. But Mark Fisher wasn't a fan of Sebald's book in any way at all. He reviewed Grant G's film Patience after Sebald, which is a film about the book. And in that he talked about how much he really hated, well, I don't say hate is necessarily the right word, but he really felt that Sebald hadn't really engaged with the Suffolk landscape at all. It was all these kind of digressions to other places and other times. I think the expression he used, and I struggled to pronounce this, was he described it as mittelbrow miserabilism, which is quite a disparaging term. Richard Mabey, the great nature writer, Richard Mabey, who wrote The Unofficial Countryside, again, if you watch these videos, very influential thoughts about what constitutes nature, what constitutes the countryside, edgelands and all that kind of stuff. What did Mabey call it? I can't remember. Mabey said reading The Rings of Saturn was like seeing someone disparage a good friend, a close friend. It's interesting. It's interesting. It did, I must admit, I reread Rings of Saturn slightly differently after reading Fisher's critique of the book. A lovely little bit of Art Deco over there, the Regal Fish Bar. And very regal it is too. And look at that glorious lump over there. What's it called? Manning's Amusements. That is beautifully hauntological for me. Look at the glorious modernist future they were imagining when they built that. Wow. We're not even at the official start of the walk, the confluence of the Orwell and the sea. That's down the end of here at Landguard Point, which has got an interesting story to tell. But I suppose, as Ian Sinclair says, the walk is the walk. Well, look at that fantastic Martello Tower over there. It's one of a sequence built along this section of the coast to ward against the threat of an invasion by Napoleon in the early 1800s. I think they were built around sort of between 1805 and 1809. Looks like it's being used as by the Coast Guard now. It's wonderful, isn't it? I think there are 7 along this stretch of coast. So my footpath that I'm going to follow, I think it's the Suffolk Coast path, is also the Stour and Orwell walk, goes down through there around the edge of the container port, but I wanted to go to Landguard Fort. This walk has already proven to be a lot longer than I anticipated. I really am going to live that idea of the Ian Sinclair thing, the walk is the walk, because I think today I just have to embrace the experience. Whatever plan I had, when you just look at a map and you plot your route from the confluence to the source, kind of the source, Ipswich station in my case, doesn't always work out that way. I've been walking now, I left the hotel at 9:15. What time is it now? It's 10:20. It's an hour and a half I've been walking. Haven't even reached the official start of the walk, but I've really enjoyed walking along the coast here, which wasn't part of the plan at all. Thinking about Mark Fisher, which is the reason that I'm here. And obviously thinking about Sebald, about the Suffolk coast, about my love for the Suffolk coast and the Suffolk countryside, which has been growing ever since I first visited Southwold 2013 and read The Rings of Saturn back there in the Nelson at Southwold. Possibly, I think that's becoming my favourite pub in the world. Oh, I'd love to be in the Nelson tonight. I'll be back in Leytonstone tonight. which I love more than anywhere else in the world, I think. But even so, I don't know where I'll end up tonight. Sunset, I say, is around 4 o'clock. I can't overlook the fact that it's only 2 months ago I couldn't get out of bed with a knackered knee. So I think Tickety Boo there gets my award for the best decorated beach hut that I've seen today. Well done, Tickety Boo. So we have got to cut sort of inland now and then go all the way back to Landguard Fort. Actually, it's just at the end of this road here and the end of that park. Wow, here it is, our first view of the enormous Felixstowe container port, the UK's largest container port, which is amazing. Mark Fisher saw those cranes there that loomed over the landscape like the tripods of the Martian invaders, of their tripods that stalked across the land in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. You can see why, can't you? There's something kind of sinister and intimidating about them, isn't there? So I think we can finally see the mouth of the estuary just down there, Landguard Point. And this whole area here at Landguard Point is a nature reserve, particularly for birds. I have to go to the very end here of the land, the end of the estuary, and then double back and around for the fort, even though it's adding a good mile onto my walk, an extra mile on top of about 4 or 5 I've already added to it, but it's definitely worth it. A little rabbit down there that just hopped across the path. Did a perfect little bunny hop as it hopped off the concrete into the grass. It's so blessed with the weather today. It's glorious and clear and sunny. And it's actually quite warm in the sun. You just get quite. I've been unzipping my jacket and taking my hat off. I took a group of American students on a walk around part of the Olympic zone yesterday, part of the old Stratford and the new. It was sort of in the late afternoon, early evening, and it lashed down. We got absolutely drenched, and I had to get on the train straight from Stratford to come here to Felixstowe, and everything was wet, my feet were soaked, my trousers were wet, everything was the inside of my bag. And it was great, I was able to dry it all out in the hotel, and the hotel room was beautiful and warm. And now today, this, perfect. This somehow doesn't seem to merit a heritage plaque, but what an amazing building this is. This is an incredible, this must be Second World War, concrete structure. Part of the numerous coastal defences here. It's really got, but it made me think of both Fisher's idea of hauntology, but also he talks about the weird and the eerie. That was his last book, was called The Weird and the Eerie, published in 2017, shortly before his death. And this really does have that kind of science fiction feel to it, doesn't it? It's sort of strangely alien. And here it is, the point where the River Orwell flows into the sea, the confluence of rivers, and also I guess the point where rivers meet the sea is always a place of pagan worship, powerful spot. an auspicious spot. Just across the estuary there you have the port of Harwich at some point down there, where I ended a walk along the Essex Way. And this is also a special point because what's happened just before the river meets the sea is it gathers the water of the River Stour and they flow out into the sea together. And this is an incredible spot looking back at the container port there. I remember looking at it from across the way in Harwich, and it looked powerful from a distance. Up close it's almost overwhelming. In a post on his blog, which was enormously influential, the blog called K-Punk, he wrote a post called Suffolk Hauntology, and he says that Suffolk was always fighting a war on two fronts, one against the sea that it is always bound to lose, and then also against possible invading armies, and a real invading army, as we'll see, up at Landguard Fort. But you get these defences against both. Things like this concrete, I guess it would have been a gun placement here. You've got the bit of iron, the base of what I guess would have been a gun. And then you've got the flood defences down here against the inevitable erosion of this coast here, the Suffolk coast, eroding at a rapid rate. So now I've reached the end of the land here, the confluence of the Orwell, the Stour and the North Sea. I'm going to walk in that direction there, inland towards Ipswich. I say towards Ipswich rather than to Ipswich, because I think it's somewhere in the region of 14 miles. And I've done quite a few miles already. And this is a great view of Landguard Fort. It's the last fort in England that fought off a full-scale invasion. In 1667, 400 troops stationed here managed to repel a Dutch invasion force of several thousand strong. What an important place. It's amazing, isn't it? Obviously you can see some later additions to it. These two sort of towers here, these structures jutting up that Fisher says are like Easter Island heads. He says this would be a perfect place for a hauntology event, a kind of 1970s Doctor Who, John Pertwee era feel to it, the kind of place that unit would keep the master prisoner. Wonderful. And it is incredible to get so close to these enormous ships piled up with containers, with shipping containers. And you look at all that stuff and those little robotic cranes sliding over that ship. It's impossible not to also think about Mark Fisher's most famous book, which was called Capitalist Realism. All that commerce, all that stuff flowing around the world. And another idea he talked about was the weird and the eerie. The weird being things that are there but look as though they shouldn't be there. That's weird, look at that. And the eerie being the absence of things. Things that are abandoned and ruined. These abandoned towers here left by the military in 1970 when the military finally abandoned this site. And there they are, ghosts looking out over the estuary, out to sea. And here we have Darrell's Battery, which the information board here says they were unusual concrete buildings. They had formidable guns and searchlights that were built in the Second World War to defend Harwich Haven. Here's an image of what they looked like, and the soldiers that operated them lived in Landguard Fort. Sadly, the fort is closed, you can't go inside, but still it's wonderful to see this rear side of it is the older part of it. The first fort though was commissioned by Henry VIII around 1543, So following on our Tudor theme, slightly still keeping it in there. This one I think mostly dates from 1744, it says here. So we've got to walk around, all the way around the edge of this vast container port, and then find our way onto the estuary. At some point I'd love a coffee actually. The port does just go on and on and on, so walking around it to get onto the path beside the river is quite a job. It's quite a significant journey. Today's a great example of the reality on the ground and how you see it on a map. It's midday, so I left the hotel about 3¼ hours ago and I've been walking the entire time. The book I'm reading at the moment is an amazing walking book called Of Walking in Ice by Werner Herzog, the famous filmmaker, Grizzly Man and all that. I think he's become known on the internet for voicing some penguins. Anyway, amazing filmmaker, and this is a walk he did in, I think it's 1974, in December, and he walked from Munich, where he lived, to Paris because a very influential German filmmaker was dying. Lotte Eisner, I think her name was, and he was like, if I walk there, she can't die. Slightly crazed walk, and also to walk from Munich to Paris he starts out on the 22nd of November, and he walks, and he just leaves with a bag, with a little duffel bag, and heads out on foot through the most atrocious weather. It's an incredible book to read, and the book is basically just his typed up notebooks that he keeps. A little bit of editing, very light editing. So some of it is where he seems to be going delirious and all sorts. And he's breaking into abandoned houses to sleep in them, sleeping in barns, in bus shelters. Through that winter, it's incredible. So at no point today, when we get to like 4 o'clock, and I'm feeling it a little bit, you won't hear me complaining after reading that book. And where he's walking through a blizzard, he hasn't got like modern waterproof clothing on or anything, and old heavy shoes that are getting wet and waterlogged. Highly recommend it. Not doing it, reading the book. So that pink road is what we've got to head to. We're not far off there now. Over that mini roundabout, and then we get to Trimley Marshes, and I think walking around Trimley Marshes might be as much as we can do. We've got to get to a train station at some point up there, so I don't know whether we'll make it, but that's certainly the next destination, which will be amazing, and at least get to some of the river. We've got about 3½ to 4 hours of light. I just stopped for a really lovely pot of coffee back there in the Rainbow Tea Rooms, which is a really lovely little place. Stopped a little bit longer than is ideal, really. I stopped for about half an hour, but I needed a rest. I've been walking for 3½ hours non-stop, so now it's 1:45. I haven't got a massive amount of time, but I'm looking forward to the journey. I suppose you would say this is the Felixstowe edgelands here, as I go around the edge of the container port, and you've got these kind of like logistics companies here. Can't all be bucolic coastline, can it? I'm not sure bucolic is the right word to describe that coastline. It's beautiful, but it's not bucolic, I don't think. Is it? What do you think? It's always reassuring when you see some signage like that. The England Coast Path shows them on the right track. One for the tourist information leaflets, the England Coast Path up ahead. This is a dock gate number 2, and from here I think Trimley Marsh is not that far away up there. So here we are finally. I think the time must be coming up for 1:30 now, and I'm on the Stour and Orwell walk, which I thought I would be on at about 10 a.m. But there you go, the walk is the walk. It does just look like I'm walking into a container park, doesn't it? But I'm hoping up there the footpath breaks off for the marshes. This one is there for the railway enthusiasts. Freightliner. This is the end of the freight train line. And it's amazing to think that from here these trains do run through Stratford, which is where I'll be heading there in about 5 or 6 hours. So this is a bit of a challenge here. You have to go across the railway line. You can see the footpath sign there, but it says to contact the signaller when gates are locked. Telephone. Oh, is the gate locked though? Is it just closed? I guess we'll find out. Yeah, look, this is not opening. It's bolted down there. I'm not just being an idiot. That gate is not opening, is it? I'm going to ring the signaller. I've got a horrible feeling I have to do an enormous detour. So that's kind of mad. You ring that guy and he just, it's a magnetic lock, and he just unlocks it and you come through. That's great. Hope the other one's unlocked as well. Well, that's an interesting experience. There's 4 of these really heavy gates on the magnetic locks, and then he said make sure they're closed, so he'll lock them again, so they'll now be locked. I guess as well to stop people trying to sneak into the container port, I suppose. Feels like a minor victory. And now it's opened up this beautiful path here. So we go around the edge of the container port and we get to the river at long last. I'll put a marker on the screen, but where you can see the footpath there running parallel to that big white block, that's where we are now. We just come across the railway tracks. And then we carry on down here. We're now up above the container port, looking down. It's absolutely vast, isn't it? And kind of overpowering. Coming here would be a reason to come to Felixstowe just to walk around this container port. If you're interested in the kind of things that I'm interested in anyway. So many, I mean, how many stories are there in there? Each one of those shipping containers contains a bundle of stories, doesn't it? I love the way they've put a bench here and effectively turn this view of the containers into a beauty spot. I think I'm going to have to sit there. I sat on that bench a little bit too long. It's just coming up to 2 o'clock. It's 5 to 2, so about an hour and 3/4 of daylight. And it's at this time that you kind of start to make alternative plans, or certainly look at the options of what to do. I know when I was thinking about it, when I started to think about this walk earlier on in the week, and I bought the map at the fantastic Waterstones at Gower Street, where they've got a copy of my book, or copies of my book, This Other London. Rare, unsigned copies as well. And I looked in a guidebook to Suffolk walks, and it had this walk, and it was, I think it showed it was a little bit ambiguous, because it broke it into sections. So it did the Felixstowe to Trimley Marsh section, and then from Trimley Marsh to the edge of Ipswich. I think that entire thing was about 12 miles, I think. And this section I'm doing now is about 5.5, I think. But that's to go all the way around. I think that's to go around Trimley Marsh. Anyway, what with the bit I've done along the coast, I've been walking 5 hours, a good 5 hours, and I've really not covered a lot of distance in terms of miles. Obviously, we've seen a lot, we've chatted a lot. So it's a good example of the difference between the journey on paper, on the map, and the journey on the ground, right? wonderful avenue of, I think are oak trees here. So this is the edge of Trimley Marshes, a vast expanse. Wow, this track goes on for ages and ages and ages. I'm wondering whether I'm ever going to reach the River Orwell. Another reference Mark Fisher uses for this landscape, this Suffolk coastal landscape, is he says a lot of it looks like the zone in Andrei Tarkovsky's very notable film Stalker, which is it's an amazing film. I highly recommend it. And there is this area where some sort of cataclysm has occurred and no one will go there anymore, so it's just an abandoned landscape. There's a guy, the Stalker, who will take people there, which is a highly illegal activity, and it's a bizarre, overgrown landscape littered with the remains of human habitation and military equipment and whatnot laid around, abandoned buildings. And still this track goes on and on and on and on. This is the final bit before I think the estuary is right at the end of this track here now. Wow, I'm finally there on the other side of the container port. What an astonishing place. All of it, not just this, all of it has just been unbelievable. And this is, you could say this is the start of the walk along the estuary, really. Man, it's taken about 3 hours to get here from the other side of the container port. Well, say 2.5, because I stopped for a coffee for half an hour, but otherwise, it's good. It's a, good amount of time. And there is something so kind of ghostly and spooky about it, isn't there? All this metal, it's a world of metal and clanking and chains and those alarms that are going, alerts, and yet you can't see a single person. You can see the movement of everything, the movement of vehicles, the movement of those containers, and the movement of the crane arms. You can hear the sound, but you can't see a single person, can you? Wow, this is really stunning. I can't think of any finer place to be at sunset. There's some bird hides down there. I think this is a real magnet for bird enthusiasts, for obvious reasons. And when you look at these wide East Anglian vistas and these great expanses of water here, these wide estuaries, it does make you think of all the people that travelled along these estuaries, that arrived here this way. Before the Viking incursions, you had the Romans had a settlement around here, and the Anglo-Saxons would have used this estuary to venture inland, to find places to come ashore and settle. Hence, we have the magnificent Sutton Hoo ship burial, not a million miles away. That's the walk I was going to do in the opposite direction, and I think I will definitely come back to do that next year in the spring when the ferry starts running. What an astonishing landscape. So I have to walk along the edge of this lagoon here, And then around on the other side there, on the very far side, before we get to the marina, I'll take the footpath that leads to Trimley High Street, and I think I'll get the train from Trimley. I don't think there's any point pushing on in the dark, to be honest with you. More echoes of the zone. What strange piece of machinery was that? And how did it end up here? Such a remote location. This is a stunning landscape, and I don't know whether you want to apply any of the terminology we've been banding around today. Hauntology, eerie, weird, or its own term. This is not a landscape for me of ghosts. This is a landscape of life, of vitality. Stunning. Just before sunset now. The light's fading. I wouldn't say fading fast, it's fading very slowly actually. It's beautiful. Quite soon we're going to be turning away from the river and picking up a footpath that leads back to the main road and then down to the station. Still, you know, a couple of miles to go to the station, but we'll be leaving the river very soon. Wow, this lovely little sandy beach here on a really wide part of the river is where we will leave the River Orwell and walk inland towards Trimley St Martin and then on to the station. It's been glorious, amazing. I think I'm going to come back and walk from Ipswich to here, maybe in the spring. This is the footpath we're taking. There is a mildly troubling disparity between the Ordnance Survey map. Look at this mud, skirt this. There's a disparity between the Ordnance Survey map and Google Map. Whereas the Ordnance Survey map shows a path continuing all the way to Trimley St Martin and the High Street, whereas the Google map shows a footpath only going a short distance, then picking up another footpath called Trimley Lower Street, which basically just runs parallel to the river, and I don't see where it leads back towards a road or towards the station. So I'm hoping the Google map is wrong and the Ordnance Survey map is right, which is what you would expect, except that Google Maps presumably are constantly updated. Anyway, we'll find out in about 10 minutes in the dark. This is encouraging. That was quite a hard slog uphill there, testing the strength of my knee. Okay so far, a few twinges, but I reckon I'll get to the station. Great view back to the mystical river. What a majestic watercourse that is. I nearly passed this massive mountain of hay bales without comment. Look at that. That's enormous. The tales this old tree could tell of passing travellers. Track beside the railway line on the edge of this field here. You've got to love these Suffolk landscapes, haven't you? Wow. How many times have I said wow today? That's not including the one that I said when I saw my hotel room. I've made it to Trimley High Street. It's about half an hour walk to the station, and the next train goes in 25 minutes. So I don't think I'm going to make it. I'll have to get the one after. It's all right, I can think of worse things. Can't quite believe I've made it here on time. I absolutely had to pound it to get here. That's incredible. Well, what an amazing day. What an amazing journey. I'm so glad I just seized the moment and booked that room at the Orwell Hotel, headed out there on a wet Thursday night and did that incredible walk. It's too much to absorb. I'll have to process it over the coming days, but I will be back. I will be back here to Ipswich, and I'm going to walk down the Orwell to Trimley and do that. And also then I'm going to walk from Felixstowe and across the River Deben and up the coast. I've got to do both of those walks. I love Suffolk. I love walking in Suffolk. I'm here at Ipswich changing trains. So as I always like to say, thank you for joining me on that walk, and I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. And thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon and the YouTube members here, and thank you to you for watching and subscribing and all of that. It's hugely appreciated. Well, take care, have a great week.
It's over the meadow, over the stream, it's where I am going and where I have been. It's been a long day now, it's time for a beer, and now for home, of course I must steer. It's over the meadow, over the stream, I hope you are pleased.